This is the easier-to-read version of 1984 by George Orwell, retold and narrated by Sarah Simpson. Part 1, Chapter 4. Even though he knew the cameras were watching him, Winston breathed a heavy sigh as he sat down at his desk at work. He couldn't help it. The days felt long and boring. The air tube that shot out the work papers was already spitting notes onto his desk. He gathered up some papers he no longer needed and pushed them into the slit in the wall where all the trash went. Everyone called the trash slits memory holes. Once you threw paper into a memory hole, it fell down a long tube into a big furnace in the basement and got burned up. They didn't keep any written records from the past. It was one of the first rules a person learned when they went to work at the ministry. Winston worked in the records department. It was their job to go back and change any written record that made Oceania or Big Brother look bad. It was especially important to change any information that showed Big Brother making a mistake or being wrong about something. Big Brother was always right. The newspaper articles needed to prove it. Winston started to look at the papers coming out of the tube and landing on his desk. The first three were boring jobs, but the fourth one was complicated and interesting. That made him smile. It felt good to get to do something challenging from time to time. Winston turned on his computer and started to type in the numbers written on the pieces of paper. The numbers pulled up different news articles that had been identified as needing to be changed or corrected. For example, there was a newspaper article last spring about a speech Big Brother gave. In the speech, Big Brother said the Eurasian army would have a big battle with North Africa, but there would be no fighting with South India. A few days later, the opposite thing happened. The Eurasian army went to war with South India. Now the newspaper article where Big Brother had made the wrong prediction needed to be corrected to say that Big Brother had predicted the Eurasian attack on South India all along. After each correction, Winston would send the updated article up the big tube. From there, the information would be sent to libraries and the news media to replace the old incorrect stories. He pushed the notes into the memory hole, ensuring that the incorrect information would be destroyed forever. Thousands of people spent all day and all night making sure that information was updated and the old wrong information was destroyed. There had been a time when it bothered Winston's conscience to destroy the old information and replace it with new information. Changing facts was forgery, and forgery was lying. However, Winston now realized that it didn't really matter what he changed. The information he was changing had been a lie, and the new information replacing it was just a different lie. Either way, none of it was true. For example, he had corrected one article that talked about the large number of boots being produced in Oceania, changing the number from 62 million pairs of boots to 57 million pairs of boots. Both numbers were obviously lies. Over half of the people in Oceania didn't even own one pair of shoes and walking around barefoot. Lies were replaced with different lies. They had changed the dates of events so often that Winston didn't even know what year it was anymore. The entire ministry office had an air of paranoia. He had worked with some of the people in the cubicles near him for years, but still did not know their names. He briefly made eye contact with a man in a cubicle across from him. Winston thought the man's name was Tillotson. When the man caught him staring, he gave Winston a dirty look before going back to his work. There were at least 50 workers just like Winston on his floor of the records department alone. There were dozens more floors, all of them filled with other workers. It took thousands of people working around the clock to keep up with the constant changes to history and the news necessary to keep Big Brother looking like the perfect leader. Even more amazing, the records department was only one of dozens of departments in the Ministry of Truth, all of them just as large as Winston's. Winston worked in a department that worked on news for members of the party. There were also departments for news and articles read by the lower classes, the proletariat or proles. While Winston's department revised scholarly articles and art for the higher classes, the proletariat section of the records department revised cheap magazines and grocery store novels. In addition to changing information, this department wrote cheesy songs and stories designed to appeal to the lower classes. Everything the proles read, saw, or listened to was designed to promote Big Brother's ideas. There was even a group in the prole records department called PornoSec. The entire job of PornoSec was to create pornography with secret pro-Big Brother messages. Members of the party like Winston were not supposed to look at that trash. It was sent out of the building to the printer in sealed brown envelopes so they wouldn't accidentally look at it. Even though Winston's job wasn't perfect, it was still the best part of his life. He lived for his work. Many of the revisions he had to do were easy and boring, but some were complex and interesting. He liked the complex and interesting jobs. He liked the challenge of figuring them out and problem-solving that got him there. It was the one part of Winston's life that made him feel excitement and satisfaction. He was good at his job. Sometimes he was even allowed to make revisions to the country's most respected newspaper, The Times. Winston looked at the interesting piece of work he had been saving for last. It said, "There is an article from December 3rd, 1983, that discusses Big Brother's order of the day. In the article, Big Brother gives orders to people who do not exist. Please fix the article to take out any references to unperson Withers, then send it to your supervisor for final approval." Winston read the article. He could see the problem right away. Most of the article was about a group called the FFCC. Their main job was to provide cigarettes, candy, and other comforts to the men in the Navy working on the floating fortresses. Big Brother had even given the head of the FFCC, Comrade Withers, a special award for his hard work. The problem was that the FFCC was closed down 3 months after the article was written. Nobody knew why the FFCC was shut down, but things like that happened all the time under Big Brother. Sometimes, if the people in the group had done something very bad that had upset Big Brother, they were publicly put on trial and executed. Most of the time, however, people who had upset Big Brother just disappeared. One day they were at their job and their apartment. The next day, they were missing. Everyone who had known them just pretended they had never existed and never spoke of them again. Winston had known more than 30 people, including his own parents, who just disappeared. He wished he could ask someone where the people had gone, but he knew that would be a very bad idea. Unless you wanted to end up missing as well, you learned to keep your questions to yourself. Winston looked around the office at the writers in the other cubicles. Many of them were probably looking at the same article he was. Each of them would write a different lie. Then a supervisor would choose the best one to publish. From then on, the new lie would become fact, at least until it needed to be changed again. Winston read the article again. He didn't know why Withers needed to be removed from the article. Maybe he had spoken out against Big Brother. Maybe people liked him too much and his superior was worried Withers would get his job. Maybe he was just gotten rid of for no reason at all. That seemed to happen a lot. Winston was pretty sure Withers was dead since he was being called an unperson. Unperson meant more than just dead. It meant the person had never even existed. That's how it worked. You got arrested, maybe they killed you right away, maybe they even let you go for a year or two. Then they'd pick you up again and you'd be dead. There was never an exact pattern to how it all worked. After that, it was like you had never existed at all. Any reference to you was wiped away. No one ever talked about you again, not even your own family. Winston thought about the best way to change the article. He thought about changing the article to be about how much Big Brother hated traitors and thought criminals, but that was probably what everyone else would do. It was the obvious, safe choice. He thought about rewriting it to talk about a big military victory, but that would mean a lot of other articles would also need to be changed. Too much work. It would be better to make up a totally random story, a complete fantasy. Winston had a great idea. Sometimes Big Brother would give a speech praising some member of the party for their loyalty or their bravery. If it were a real person, that could lead to problems later. What if they became an unperson later? That would be a lot of revisions. But if Winston just made up a person for the article, they could never upset Big Brother and need to be removed later. It was the perfect solution. What should he call this imaginary hero? Ogilvy, he thought. I'll call him Comrade Ogilvy. Winston started to type. It was easy to write a speech that sounded like Big Brother. The trick was to make him ask a series of questions, then immediately answer them himself. That was Big Brother's favorite style of speaking. What lessons do we learn from this, comrades? We learn loyalty and obedience. That's what we learn. Winston made up fact after fact about the imaginary Comrade Ogilvy. When he was a child, Comrade Ogilvy refused to play with toys except for toy guns. He had joined the spies when he was only 6 years old, and by the time he was 9, he had turned in his own uncle as a traitor. When he was 17, Comrade Ogilvy had been in charge of a chapter of the Anti-Sex League. When he was 19, he designed a hand grenade that killed 31 Eurasian enemy fighters the very first time it was used. He died when he was 23. His plane was shot down by the enemy, and his final words were, "Long live Oceania! Long live the party! Long live Big Brother!" He had been a loyal party member to the very end. Winston looked around at the other writers in the records department. Once again, he was sure that several of them were working on the exact same story right now. Winston would never know for sure, but he felt confident that his story was the best one and would be chosen. An hour ago, Comrade Ogilvy didn't exist. Now, because of Winston's writing, he had become a real person. It was funny how you could bring a dead man to life, but not write down anything about real, living men. Someday, if Winston's story survived, someone would read it and believe that Comrade Ogilvy had been a real, living person, just as real and famous as historical figures like Charlemagne and Julius Caesar. Winston wondered if there had been someone like him all those hundreds of years ago who had made up Charlemagne and Julius Caesar. After all, the only reason anyone knew they had existed was from written records. The thought made Winston feel sick to his stomach.